Good afternoon. It is 2:01 p.m. Central Time. I'm Leon Davis, and you're listening to Altitude Adjustment, the weekly podcast about people, politics, and professions. And today we've got a special guest. We've got Jim Judge from the Better Business Bureau. We're going to be talking about um, charity fraud. And that's coming right up.
Welcome to Altitude Adjustment.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, Jim.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is truly our pleasure. One of the things that we're going to talk about definitely is charity fraud.
Sure.
So many things going on. My mind just went completely blank. So I'm going to actually let Leonard introduce you directly. Did you get like information on Jim, Leonard?
Not much, but we'll go with what we got.
Okay. You want him to introduce himself?
I can introduce myself if you like.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
Give you a good idea.
Huh?
Sure. So I work with the Better Business Bureau, and my capacity is the manager of our charity information service. And our charity information service, most of the time when people think of Better Business Bureau, you're thinking of filing a complaint about a company that made you mad. But BBB actually has a lot of services it provides to the public, and these are all free of charge. One of the services that we provide is the Charity Information Service, where we put together reports on charities that are getting inquiries into our database. So if people are calling about a specific charity, we reach out to the charity, try to get them to complete an interactive online questionnaire, and then we put a report together based on what they submit through that questionnaire. Just to give you an idea, some of the other things BBB does, if you do use our complaint processing service and go through that department, then if initially the complaint can't get resolved just with a little back and forth, we do have mediation services available. We offer arbitration services. We are also involved in advertising review, where you see ads online, in the newspaper, on TV. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, kind of stuff. So we have a variety of services we provide. The complaints is just one facet. Most of the people calling us are calling to check out a business or a charity before they do business with them.
Excellent.
Sorry, but that gets to me, specifically about me. I've been with the BBB almost 20 years now. I work as a consultant now for multiple Better Business Bureaus, and with the St. Louis office, I'm involved very heavily, and I actually was the one that started the St. Louis charity program, and so we've expanded to a point where we're at about 1,500, a little more than 1,500 reports on nonprofits. And we have many accredited charities. So when we do these charities, when we do the evaluations, if they meet all of our standards, we have 20 standards we use. If they meet all of those standards, they're considered to be accredited. And it's not easy. I'm not going to tell you that it's it's like a lot of certifications where you pay money and you get a stamp. We do ask a lot of questions. We look at a lot of information. We look at tax forms, audits, board attendance, you name it. And put together a pretty really good holistic overview of a charity that donors can be able to make a wise giving decision based on that report. So that's what I do. I'm the charity guy, I guess you could say.
So
Okay, now what's the difference? I'm sorry. Go ahead,
go ahead.
Leon.
Go ahead.
What's the difference between a charity that the BBB would list as accredited as opposed to one that's not?
I don't want to disparage small charities or new charities or anything by saying that only the only legitimate organizations out there are accredited by BBB or other entities that are out there. I don't want to say that. What I will say is, I guarantee you, if a charity is accredited through Better Business Bureau, that they have their ducks in a row. They're very organized. They have proper policies and procedures in place to meet all of our standards, which conflicts of interest, CEO performance review, measuring their own effectiveness, We have financial criteria that they have to meet, and in some cases not exceed certain percentages for how much they spend. So it's you're looking at a deeper dive, I think, when you're looking at a charity that's accredited by BBB. That's not to say that there isn't organizations that are really well run that aren't accredited. They've just decided that it's not something they wanted to do, or for whatever reason. But I'd say the biggest difference is, I can't speak for all charities, but I can with the charities that we accredit. I can tell you, you're going to be giving to a well run organization.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, and sometimes even when we start this process, we will get inquiries. We'll get donors calling in about new charities, about charities that might just be starting up, and they've never heard of them before, so they want to check them out. And a lot of those organizations we reach out to and say, hey, we don't have a report on you, but here's what our process looks like. What can we do to help you? When we walk new charities through this process, we tell them this is a baseline set of best practices you can use to build your organization. So doing some things that you might not think of doing. In a lot of cases, brand new organizations are run on a lot of emotion. You have people that really have a lot of uh, get up and go when it comes to a specific topic. They want to serve that particular purpose, and we're all for that. But there needs to be some business acumen behind it. You have to have some knowledge. You have to know what's required, whether it's through the government, through legally what's required by the organization, or what's just generally considered a best practice in the sector. So we're able to kind of do some hand holding for them and get them down that path. So, and I've seen it a bunch of times where organizations we accredited 10 years ago, 15 years ago, are now big and doing quite well. So it's kind of cool to see and to watch the growth. And I always love telling stories about organizations like that. Uh, when you look at our standards, you'd think this might be something that's a little bit out of reach for a smaller organization. But the reality is, I just did an update report on a small local organization, and their revenue is under $10,000 a year. So that's a small organization. We also have organizations that are bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars. So yeah, if we can usually work with the newer groups, and try to help them through the process.
Okay.
so now the complaint process. Um, someone. So if they have a complaint against a non-accredited um, charity, what happens then?
We would still process it. So we have pretty much anybody that gets a complaint. It doesn't matter what kind of organization you are, whether you're a for-profit or a nonprofit. If we get a complaint that's within the our purview as far as what we would take, then we would process the complaint. We'd add them to the database and process the complaint. And some of the things that we couldn't process would be along the lines of like allegations of illegal activity, like this person stole, I don't know, my car or something like that. If you're alleging an actual criminal activity, then that's law enforcement. You need to go that route. BBBs, a lot of people think BBB is involved somehow with law enforcement. While we do work with them and we share our information when necessary, and we do alert law enforcement to fraud and scams, BBB is not a charity or we're not law enforcement ourselves. We are actually considered a 501c6, which is a similar to a chamber of commerce, I guess you could say. If you look at nonprofits, there's under Internal Revenue Code 501, there's multiple C designations. When we look at charities, we're looking at 501c3s, public entities. And then C6s are going to be trade associations. And then there's all kinds of other ones. I think there's 50 something, if not more, designations under 501. So yeah, that kind of one of the notes I had to mention. When you do get calls from charities or somebody wants you to donate to them, understand that the only organization, the only type that you can give to that is actually tax deductible is going to be a 501c3. So somebody can be nonprofit, but donations are not necessarily tax deductible. If you were to donate to BBB, if you didn't donate to a 501c3 foundation that we had, which we do have, but if you donated to the C6, it wouldn't be tax deductible.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it gets a little confusing. It's kind of there's a lot of the legal jargon and stuff, but in general, when you donate, if you donate to a public charity like your United Ways, American Red Cross, things like that, those are 501c3s. Those are typically what you're going to want to donate to.
Well, you just educated me. I didn't know anything about 501c6.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. Those are the most common. The C3s, which is your general charity, and then C6s, which, like I mentioned, typically chambers of commerce, trade associations, and then another one that you'll see a lot of. Another one that does a pretty decent amount of soliciting, and this tends to be more along the telemarketing lines. Are labor related associations, and one of the ones that we get a lot of calls about are police and fire based organizations where they're
Yeah.
asking you to give money. They usually call around dinner time. They want you to donate
Mhm.
to help the police or the fire department, and then you find out when you ask questions. Which, uh, just a side note, if you ever get those kind of calls, tell them to send you something. Don't give
Mhm.
over the phone. Just say send it to
Right.
me so you can look into it, because a lot of times you're going to find out once you start looking at the materials and you flip it over and you look at the fine print, you're going to find out that the person that called you was a professional that was for a for-profit company that kept or keeps a pretty good portion of them proceeds. If you want to give directly to your local police department, go for it. I'd call them and ask who to donate to. Same thing with the fire department. It's just best. You get unsolicited phone calls, and it's really random like that. There's usually not a lot of good that goes along with it, and we always say take a step back. And I think one of the biggest hallmarks of a charity scam is going to be this idea that you need to give right now. The reason why they want to push you and pressure you is because they don't want you to think. The more pressure they can lay on you and walk away with that money, they're not planning on getting a donation every year from you. They just want the money then and there, and they'll walk away and you'll never hear again from them. If it's a real legitimate group, a good organization is going to want to educate you. They're going to want to bring you in, and they're going to want you to donate more than once. Donor education, it keeps donors there year after year after year. So a lot of scammers and not so good operators, some unethical types out there, will push you without giving you a lot of information. They'll just pressure you to donate, and they'll give you sob stories. They'll show you horrible pictures and do stuff like that. But there's a lot of emotion and very little fact, and that's what you need to have as a red flag.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I hear about in the news, every um, around a certain time of the year, you start getting these warnings about particular charity scams.
Mhm.
So like around Christmas time. So what type of um, what type of scams um, do you find that you get most complaints about in your office?
Most of the complaints, and to be honest with you, we do not get a ton of complaints on charities themselves. We do get a pretty decent amount of calls when it's connected to junk mail, a lot of mail that comes in, and telemarketing. With the junk mail that comes in, and this will happen a lot if you have older people in your family that want to they have some disposable income or they have some money saved up. They want to do good, they want to help, they want to donate, and they give to one organization that sent them a solicitation piece by mail, and then all of a sudden you find out that this person, their name's been sold to several other not so great charities, and they're bombarding them with solicitations all the time. So we get complaints on that where people wanted to be removed from mailing lists. uh, a lot of times you give to one of the bad guys and they share your name with everybody. A lot of them are connected entities, they're all connected together, and they end up just all of a sudden you're getting a deluge of junk mail. We
Yep.
had one individual, elderly man, that would come into our office about once a month with a mail bin full of letters. I'm not kidding you. He had to be getting 3 or 4 a day. And these were
Mm.
all organizations. If you did research on them, you'd say, I probably don't want to donate to that one. Maybe I should pick somebody else, because you look at the numbers, you look at how their money's being used, and it's like, yeah, that's not so great. So he would come in, and we just told him, we implored him, please do not donate. Don't donate. Let us look at it first, and then we'll tell you. And we got a lot of information from that particular gentleman, because he'd bring in the stuff that we couldn't otherwise get. But it gave us a really good snapshot, or idea of how people are being approached, and in some cases manipulated by these mail houses and entities that you just don't want to give to. The other one that we get complaints on is going to be telemarketing, and kind of like what I said before, they're going to call around, dinner time. I guess now you can call anytime, since so many people are working from home. But yeah, around dinner time, they want you to. They usually start out with, do you support local police and fire protection, and all that good stuff? And most people are not going to say no, I don't support that. They're going to want to, oh yeah, yeah, and that's how they kind of rope you in and start then working with you to see if they can get you to give them some money over the phone. Uh, Best bet, or best advice I can give you, is to say, why don't you go ahead and mail me something? If they don't want to mail you something, then that's a red flag right there. There's a reason why they don't want you educated on what they're doing. Uh, Another thing, good resource for just everybody, is the Internal Revenue Service actually posts tax forms online. So if you look up like just IRS tax exempt search, you can actually look up a tax form for a charity on the IRS website, and it'll go through how much money they spend in salaries, how much is spent on programs, how much is spent on fundraising, administrative costs. And in there, you can see if there's somebody that's doing telemarketing for them. You will be able to see what the entity's name is and how much money they're bringing in as a result of it. And unfortunately, some of the worst cases out there, they're keeping upwards of 90% of the money, and it's not going to any of the charity itself. On top of that, the charity itself, uh, it's using the word charity on very loosely. Very small portion of the money actually goes to help anyone, and
Right.
that's. But I do want to clarify, that is few and far between. We warn people about these things. In St. Louis, in particular, the vast majority, 99.9% of our charities, our local charities, are great organizations. They do awesome work in the community. We would not be where we are without them. But there's a small percentage that's out there. Very few are even locally based. The scam and the unethical types that we're talking about are usually going to be based somewhere else, and they kind of pop in the area, kind of hit and run. They don't want to get too much interest from law enforcement, so they hit an area fast, and then they move on to somewhere else, and they hit that area and move, and hit and move, and hit and move, and that's the way they run their game.
Hmm. Okay, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Um, what is the best definition for charity fraud?
For charity fraud, so there's what we deal with at BBB is a little different than what law enforcement deals with. So a
Mhm.
main focus of what we deal with is ethics and what's right and what's wrong.
Okay.
If you were to go buy a car and the salesman lied to you a bunch, and you went and you bought the car anyway and signed the papers, and you went home and you decided, you know what, this isn't good, and it was a month later, and you filed a complaint with various legal offices or talked to an attorney, the
Hmm.
attorney would tell you you're out of luck. You can't really do anything.
Right.
We would process a complaint in that situation, where we would say, okay, there was, if you're alleging lying and misleading sales tactics, then we would process the complaint. Now, it is a he said, she said kind of situation. But the
Yeah.
way that we look at it, and a lot of good businesses would look at it, is if they had an employee that was out there doing that kind of thing, they'd want to know it. And if you see a pattern of this occurring over and over and over, that's something an owner or a manager of a business would certainly want to be aware of. So that would be part of the complaint process. In general, fraud type allegations would be out and out ripping people off. Doing soliciting money. The most common charity one would be asking for money and then not doing anything with it but putting it in your pocket. That's most common thing you're going to see. Typically, those kind of outfits are going to be very small. They're going to be kind of the hit and run type outfit. They're going to do door knocking, maybe standing at stoplights, things where you don't have a chance to really do any research and find out what an organization's all about, because it's just going to be a real quick interaction. But they don't do anything with the money, but keep it. That would be probably the most common outright fraud. Not something we see a whole lot of. People are pretty vigilant now, and I think now that we have everybody's got a supercomputer in their pocket, you're usually going to look at some things before you make a rash decision.
Sure.
But that would be your more common one. Beyond that, I think one of the more common would be more unethical than it would be fraud for the most part. It would be just okay for fraud. For the unethical side, I would say it would be misrepresentation of what they do, not spending enough money on their programs. When we're looking at programs, we look at least 65% of the money goes to programs. So all of your expenses, at least 65% needs to go to programs. That's not that's not a high mark. 65%, I've had people ask, why is it so low? The reality is, one, 65% is that threshold is to, if you're below that, something's probably wrong. And if it isn't something that can be explained by like natural disaster or let's say COVID for this, what we're dealing with now, then something is definitely wrong. So you want to make sure you're hitting those marks there. And so we look pretty close at those things. But that would be kind of probably the most unethical problem. The fraudulent side, again, sound-alikes, impersonating charities. If you get somebody that calls you on the phone and they say, hey, we're from the so-and-so with cancer or whatever, look the name up, because you don't know if that's actually the organization you think it is. You may know the American Cancer Society. You've heard of them. You've seen their advertisements. You know they're a reputable organization. But a lot of scammers will use a name that sounds similar to well-known established organizations. And then you donate to them and you never find out what happens. It's gone. I think one of the reasons we get a little problem, we don't get as many complaints with charities, is once people give, that's you don't really have another interaction with the organization for a while. So you may not find out that, hey, I gave to the wrong cancer organization until you do a little research or you see something on the news.
Okay.
Did you have another one?
So on the actual fraud side, or if there turns out to be an investigation, what's the conviction rate, and what do they do?
Yeah, it's a lot of times when we see the fraudulent activity occur, that at that point we turn around and we say, look, this is something that we think needs to be had some eyes on it by law enforcement. So we'll send it over to whether it's the local police department. It kind of depends on the size of it, or the attorney general's office. And in some cases, other entities get involved as well. We really leave it up to them to act. A lot of times, just because of resources in general, when it comes to law enforcement, there's going to have to be a good amount of victims. It can't be just a little tiny, somebody took $10 from 10 people. You doubt you're going to see a lot of activity from the attorney general's office on that, but you might see something from local police department for fraud there. So it kind of depends on the situation. I know if the attorney general's office does get involved in investigating and going after a charity, if you see something in the news about them suing a charity for something, they've got them for the most part. They're not going to go after them if they don't know that they're going to get a win. So I'd say, to answer your question, pretty high. If they're charging, then it's going to be pretty high.
Okay. We discovered online that there was you're familiar with Black Lives Matter, right?
Sure.
So there's a Black Lives Matter Foundation. And when I first saw that, I'm like, oh, okay, this must be them. And then when I dug into it, I Googled it and turned out that they were totally separate, had nothing to do with them. In fact, these guys were trying to kumbaya with the police.
Sure.
I'm like, wow, that's crazy. I wonder how many people they've actually taken money from with the wrong impression.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to get the specific name. And the other side of that is, if you are approached, whether it's somebody knocking on your front door or calling you on the phone,
Mhm.
ask for something that you can look at and take the time to make a decision, because you see the big words, and it's kind of like advertisements. The fine, or the big bold print gives you everything, and then the fine print takes it away. So you want to
Yeah.
make sure you really read through everything. And in those cases where you have organizations that are trying to sound like a well-known organization, you see that happen pretty regular with throughout the country. Whenever there's like, let's say, a police officer involved shooting, or a natural disaster, where you'll have sound alikes come in and try to uh, you know horn in on some of the money, because they have a name that sounds similar or sounds like something that would be supportive of victims, and you end up finding out that they will not in any way, shape, or form helpful. It was just helping them line their pockets.
Yeah, right. Go investigate.
Well,
Definitely.
so I don't know, maybe a few years ago, I felt like there were a number of large charities that got their hands slapped because of their um, ratio of what's going towards helping out, and what they're using for operating costs. Um, so has that so you had mentioned that that it's they'd have to take from a lot of people in order to draw attention. Um, and the only way to recognize is from complaints. Do you take any proactive measures when you see charities that could possibly be, double dealing or not um, doing what they should do?
Yeah. Yeah, and just to clarify, when we were talking earlier, we were talking more of law enforcement and conviction, and what actually would go through a court. BBB, again, because we aren't law enforcement, we don't sue somebody into submission, so to speak. We
Mhm.
what our method is, if we see a scam going on, or unethical operations, or we see a pattern of complaints, we will alert the public to that fact. We issue news warnings, where we'll go to the organization or the business and say, hey, this is what we're getting as far as allegations go, or this is the pattern of complaints. What are you going to do to fix it? If they ignore us or decide, we're not going to do anything, well, at that point, it's time to let the public know that it would be in your best interest to avoid doing business with this entity. And we put it back out to the public. Um, BBBs in general were created as for self-regulation. It was the whole idea was business owners kind of banded together to spotlight the bad guys back in the early 1900s. They all came together, and there would be traveling salesmen back then that would come in and rip everybody off and leave. Well, when they ripped everybody off and left, nobody had money to buy from the legitimate businesses anymore. So that's the whole idea behind the BBB and self-regulation. So when we do see scams like that, we push that information back out. We get it out to the news media. We do interviews whenever we can, whether it's TV, radio, you name it. We're trying to get out there and really push that information to let people know. And it has a bigger impact now than it ever has, really. Even though, because you're seeing a lot of different mediums that are being used to push information out, and then once something hits the web, it's there forever, and that's a good thing. You have a bad experience with a charity, you tell the Better Business Bureau, you complain to whoever. If a warning comes out from us, if somebody Googles that organization's name, our release is going to be pretty high up on the results. So somebody's going to see that, and it's in their best interest to fix, unless their goal is just to take money and walk. So yeah, that's what we do. And I would say, when we look at patterns, um, we have to see that it's that it's common and it's going on over and over and over. When we start being a more proactive role would be when we get allegations that come in from, sometimes it's competitors, sometimes it's individuals that worked at a place, sometimes it's people that just say, hey, I heard this. uh, we do take those kind of insider tips and we'll look into them, and a lot of times that means digging through tax forms and trying to figure out exactly what money's going where. And if we find that somebody's in the area soliciting our local donors, and it's a ridiculous amount of money that's actually going to their programs, yeah, we'd be proactive and issue a warning saying, hey, these people are in our area. Um, this is how much money they give to their programs. You make the call whether you want to donate to them or not. And that's how BBB gets its word out. We're not judging them per se. We're just letting people make a decision based off facts. If 10% of their money goes to their programs, do you want to give to them? So that's kind of how we make people understand and educate them when they're in those situations. So we do definitely take some proactive measures, and then once that information gets out to the public, depending on, at that point you may end up seeing a huge number of complaints come into law enforcement because, hey, I was also that guy, or hey, I saw them too, and I think something needs to be done. Um, it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge number of complaints. If there's enough public outcry, though, you can get some action.
So there are a number of large companies that also have charitable foundations, or um, or big dollar people who have businesses that also run charitable organizations. And so how does the BBB navigate that situation? Because I'm guessing that the company wants to cozy up to the BBB to make sure that their ratings remain high, and then you still have an oversight of the charitable side of that business. How does the BBB manage that situation?
Yeah, it's one of those, we have certain policies and procedures in place to ensure that we're as unbiased as possible. BBBs are, for the vast majority of our support is through our accredited businesses and membership dues. But with those membership dues and with that membership, or that accreditation through Better Business Bureau, those for-profit companies are required to sign a license agreement. They have to meet certain standards and they have to uphold these standards. And if they start slipping, then they will be removed. I mean, we kick out companies all the time for not following the rules, I guess you could say. So we hold our accredited businesses to a higher standard than we do other businesses. When it comes to the charity side, it's going to be the same kind of thing. If we have an accredited charity, we know that they've met specific standards. It can be a little bit different with the for-profit entity and their foundation. A lot of times you're seeing these for-profit or nonprofit foundations of large businesses, but they aren't really soliciting the public. They're not asking for donations. They're more of a giving arm. So they tend to be the ones that are granting money out than they are taking money in from the public. Our main focus tends to be, at least at the BDB, our main focus tends to be the organizations that are out there asking people for money, as opposed to the ones that are handing money out. So yeah, we certainly have to make sure that we're definitely not beyond following the rules ourselves. and we want to make sure that everything's definitely on the up and up. So that's why we have those accreditation agreements, and you have to, no matter what, follow certain guidelines, and you can't have a lot of complaints, you can't have government action, you can't have a bunch of lawsuits hanging over your head, all kinds of stuff like that. So we do a pretty good amount of research before we allow the accreditation, just in general.
So what you mentioned is that you kind of gave me the impression that that a lot of the BBB offices are independent of one another. Is that, so what is
Yeah.
the actual structure of the BBB?
So, Better Business Bureau, we have an umbrella organization, the International Association of Better Business Bureaus. And under that umbrella is multiple small, in some cases larger offices that are all BBBs. And it's all by geographic area. You would look at, there's, I can't tell you exactly how many in Texas, but there's a good chunk of BBBs in Texas. There's Better Business Bureaus, like for example, where this particular one in St. Louis serves out eastern Missouri and southern Illinois. We cover We have offices in Springfield, Missouri. We have offices over in Illinois, in Quincy. So we have a pretty good reach here, a pretty good size service area. And then there's some offices that are even bigger than that, out, Phoenix area and things like that. But each office has its own tax ID. It's got its own EIN. They're separate 501c6s. Kind of like if you were to look at United Way, for example. There's a national body, and then there's multiple separate offices throughout the country, and each of them has their own chief executive and board of directors, board chairs, things like that. So yeah, everybody's a bit separate, but because of that umbrella organization, we have certain guidelines that have to be met. There's reviews that have to be done on a regular basis by the national body. So everybody has to be operate their service area in a similar manner, and we have rules that we have to follow in order to stay as a BBB.
So do they share a database? Because if someone is a bad actor in the Midwest, if you're not sharing that data, they could go out to the western half of the country and pick right up and start doing what they're doing. So how do they? Is there a central database that they all share?
So everybody has their own database, and then yes, there is where it's funneled into one spot so somebody can go in and check records and information that way. So there is a way, yeah. If you start, and you're right, a lot of times we used to see this pretty regular when before, and this is dating me, but before everything was online, you had to do a lot of digging and research when you were doing investigations, and we'd end up following and calling, and we'd go through 3 or 4 different states where we found the person had been operating and stirred up enough trouble that he decided it was time to leave and move on to the next state. So yeah, the way this is set up, we're able to track really quickly, and we can see complaints before. What we would do is find out what states they were in, what allegations were out there, and then we'd start calling specifically those BBBs and asking for their records if they had anything. But now, yeah, it's much more streamlined. Everything's funneled into one endpoint, and then it makes it so much easier. And honestly, if you go to bbb.org and do a search on a company, you're going to have access to something very similar.
Anybody else? Any questions? I think I am taxed out.
I got a lot of information there, but
Absolutely.
sounds like a really complex organization when you look at all the different locations and aspects of how they correlate with one another.
Yeah. There's you're dealing with an organization that's over 100 years old. It's got a lot of history to it, and I think one of the reasons why you see so many separate locations is because everybody has every area has a certain way of doing business. And if you do a lot of traveling, everybody's so different. The way people act in the southern part of Texas is a little different than the people that act, how they act in the eastern part, or West Coast compared to East Coast, that kind of thing. And I think it's important to have a big presence, or a very local presence,
Okay.
in order to take advantage of that knowledge. Uh, I think it'd be crazy to think that eventually there isn't going to be, everybody's morphing into one giant entity. Who knows? But it's certainly right now the way it is each is individual, and I think especially some of the smaller service areas, they're very proud, and uh, they love having the kind of the local connection that they can go to.
Yeah, sounds like a bit of a cultural feel. Yeah, I got it.
Yeah. I, so the Better Business Bureau gets its funding from the accreditation.
Yeah.
Um, so the
Yeah.
accreditation kind of gives a business credibility that they've been vetted as far as their business practices and treating their customers and society in a particular way. And so far, this has worked well. But I can see that. So I'm trying to find a delicate way to dance around this one.
I think, are you probably alluding to, how do we ensure that there isn't any kind of conflict of interest?
That's
And
one. Yes.
yeah, and it's definitely a valid question, and certainly something that should be asked, and we look at it all the time, because a lot of times perception is reality, even though it might not really be the truth. We have to make sure we understand what people look at and see. And one of the things that we have a letter grading system that we use for our for-profit businesses. Now, accreditation on the charity side, they don't pay anything. Just throwing that out there so you know. If you meet all 20 standards on the charity side, you're accredited. So just this is a little different. On the business side, there is a fee for accreditation, and accreditation allows for, among other things, which different resources that we give, and um, all that good stuff. The use of the logo, our seals, and things like that. Uh, if an organization or pardon me, a company comes and wants to be accredited, yeah, with that fee, they do have a membership agreement, or an accreditation agreement they have to sign, and they have to agree to certain things. We review advertising all the time. One of the biggest fears we would have is the local news does a story about a scam artist, and they walk in and there's a BBB seal somewhere. That would, that's not what we want to have happening. So we have to make sure, if we're allowing the use of our likeness, that these entities are going to be go above and beyond and be ethical organizations, and ethical companies. So certainly something we have to deal with all the time. That letter grade that we use, it takes into fact, or into account, how long somebody's been in business, if they have any complaints, what's the volume of complaints, the size of the business, how much revenue are they bringing in, how many employees. So there's a lot of factors that go into that letter grade, none of which is accreditation or not accreditation. So you can have an A+ and not be accredited. That's not something that's taken into consideration. That's one of the things that we do to make sure, like, hey, we accredit organizations whether or not they are we give you an A+ whether or not you're accredited or not. So we just make that a very clear to people.
Okay.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's something that's always going to be a question. I think just the nature of the beast. But it again is the whole idea about what we do and why we do it is regulation. It gives industries, when we have hailstorms come through, and all of a sudden there's all these storm chasers around, then our roofing accredited businesses come to us and say, hey, there's a bunch of people from, I don't know, 2 states over that are taking business away from us.
Right.
So we start digging into these storm chasers and making sure that they aren't bringing a bunch of complaints along with them. These are the things. It's all about the idea of that self-regulation.
And that's, well, so for me, the self-regulation, I think is, is beneficial in a society where people honor, have honor, they have dignity, they have self-respect, and they want to. So self-regulation is a good thing.
Sure.
The thing that I guess that I'm uncomfortable with about self-regulation is that far too often we see companies that will pollute. So they will pollute. They will. I remember when Best Buy first came into the St. Louis market. Best Buy used the bait and switch when they first got here. That's how they established themselves in St. Louis. They would advertise a product for $9.99. You get to the store, we don't have that product, but we do have this one for $12.59, and that allowed them to establish themselves in the market before they went legit, basically. So they started then doing things in a more forthright and upright manner. And so while I think self doing things on an honor system is great,
As long as there's honor.
as long as there's honor. And so I guess my only concern is, so we've been hit with the worst economic situation ever. How do businesses move forward from here? Because the opportunity to try to cut corners, try to ignore their honorable their ethical responsibility is going to be greater. So the Better Business Bureau is actually more needed, and it would be nice for them to be definitely proactive in ensuring that those businesses are living up to the ethical standards by which they agreed to.
Definitely. Yeah, I think we are. These are unprecedented times. It's something, that happens every 100 years. It's wild that it's happened.
Mhm.
One of the things I think that one of the trends that we're seeing is that there is an expectation from, and these even younger consumers, uh, as they get younger and younger, when we start looking at the general age of who's buying what, there's an expectation that you can't just be a slash and burn business that you just want to make money hand over fist and that's it. There's an expectation that you give back some. There's an expectation that you care about the environment. There's an expectation that you care about diversity and things like that. I think that's becoming more important to the average consumer. So I hope that that is something that it gets integrated into the whole idea of self-regulation. But I think we may see a different type of business as time goes on, one that's a little more connected to their communities. And there's always going to be people out there that are just trying to make a buck. But I think if you want to look at entities that are planning on being around for a while, you're going to have to make people happy. And by doing that, you're going to have to give back to your community. You're going to have to make sure you're diverse. You're going to have to make sure you're doing things other than just making money off them.
All right, Jim. I think we have taken up quite a bit of your time, and I really do appreciate you coming in and speaking with us.
Sure.
I do think that the mission of the BBB is a very valuable one with great honor. Self policing allows for greater trust, and so hopefully that your role will expand and not shrink in our society. Anybody else have any other questions before I kind of get us out of here?
I don't have any.
All righty. Again, thank you, Jim. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Maybe we might have you back for another show.
Anytime. I appreciate you having me on. It's always good to talk. I hope I didn't talk too much.
Not at all. Not at all.
All right.
New information.
Good stuff. Well, gentlemen, have a great rest of your weekend, and take care.
You also. Goodbye. That concludes this. Thank you very much, sir. Altitude Adjustment, and thank you for listening. This podcast is streamed live on YouTube and Twitch.tv and is designed for listener interaction. Visit the website, thelionsdenstl.wixsite.com/home to join the discussion. The audio version of Altitude Adjustment is available where you get your podcasts, including Stitcher.com, the iTunes Store, and the Google Play Music Store, to name a few. Remember that the internet is powered by your likes, shares, and comments. So please like, share, and comment on this and other episodes of Altitude Adjustment, because it matters. And as always, look out for the other guy, because they may not be looking out for you.